All right. So for those of you I haven't met, I'm Juliet Schindler. I am Executive Director of Public Affairs and Strategic Partnerships at College Success Foundation. I have been at CSF for 9 years this next month. And part of what I do is oversee our passport contract, but also our government relations work. We are a public-private partnership, and happy to share more about that offline if anyone is curious. And I'm going to, and I use she, her pronouns. And I am calling in today from Coast Salish lands here in Seattle area. And I'm going to hand it over to Emily to introduce herself.
Thanks, Juliet. Hi, everyone. I'm Emily Stochel. I also use she, her pronouns, and I'm on Coast Salish and Puyallup land here in Tacoma. I'm the Program Manager of Government Relations and Advocacy at College Success Foundation, and I've been here for about a year.
And we have a pretty big group, so I'm going to ask you all if you could just drop your name and if you would like preferred pronouns, and again, if you'd like the native lands you're joining us from, and your organization in the chat, and then we'll move along. So today we want to talk about advocacy, and this is literally the last working day before we start our 2023 legislative session, which kicks off at noon on Monday, January 9th. So just giving you a little bit of background before we kind of get into more details. On odd years, like we're in now, a long legislative session, 105-day session. Even years are a 60-day session. The main reason for that different length of time is it's during the odd years that the legislature takes on writing the biennial or 2-year budget, the operating budget, the capital budget, and the transportation budget. When we're talking today, we're mostly going to be referring to the operating budget, which is kind of most relevant, but there are definitely times that there's, building funds in capital budget, or that a transportation budget might be of interest as well. But so that longer 105-day session is time to go through all the different policy issues and fiscal bills, but all kind of at the end, the big finale is passing a 2-year budget, which also needs to be balanced over 4 years, called the budget outlook. During the shortest session and the even years is a supplemental budget. And the idea of the supplemental budget is to make corrections, which have, for the situation or economic situation, has changed since the last budget was passed. So perhaps the caseload has gone up or down and needs more or less funding. That's one kind of common example, which probably is relevant to some of you. There's some other unexpected need. And sometimes we can also be successful in getting new funding, but in general, new funding is more typical to happen during a longer session. For those organizations like College Success Foundation, where we work, who have state dollars coming to us, those go through contracts with our partners. We work with WASAC and OSPI with our contracts, and once a bill, including a budget bill, is passed into law, that changes the statute language, and the government contracts are modified with that updated language, and in many cases, funding levels. So a great resource to be familiar with, you can see linked here, and it's the ledge.wa.gov, and you'll see really a ton of information, including committee schedules, the session schedule, which includes the cutoff dates, which is the different dates throughout legislative session where bills have to reach certain milestones in order to continue through the process. You can look up details about all the different legislators in both chambers, in their bio, the committees they serve on, how long they've been in office, what their legislative district is, of course. And there's also a physical legislative information center on Capitol Campus in Olympia, but also information about legislative information can also be found on the website. You can also sign up for emails if you want to track a specific bill or follow the committees. You could get like the daily updates on what bills will be heard in different committees. So that's an easy way to have that just show up in your inbox on a regular basis throughout the course of session. So for a bill to go from concept to law is by design a fairly complex process. And I say that because it was created so that there are definitely a number of obstacles on purpose to becoming law, because those who set up the institutions of this process did not want laws to be made willy-nilly, so to speak. So I'm not going to go through all the details. There's a lot of nuances, but just give you kind of an overview so you can kind of get an idea of that process. The bill, obviously, once you have an idea, it has to be put into written form, so it's drafted, and then it must have a prime sponsor, and that the prime sponsor then asks for other signatures, other sponsors. And that bill is, quote, dropped, and it gets introduced onto the chamber floor. And when I say chamber, I mean either the House of Representatives or the Senate. So this process is happening concurrently in both chambers with different bills. And then the bill is assigned to the relevant policy committee, depending on the topic of the bill. We're going to talk more about the committees that are kind of most relevant to the work of WPN. And they're heard in committee. And that is the first opportunity for the public input. Of course, there can be input all along the way, including in the drafting, for advocates and others to get involved. But the actual committee hearings are when there's a defined time for testifying and bringing your concerns or support for bills, and speaking to what the policy would be. For bills that are over a certain funding level, they also need to go on to a fiscal committee. In the House, that's appropriations, and in the Senate, that's Ways and Means. And again, this is for the operating budget and bills that would affect the operating budget. And then there's also some committees like Capital and Finance that have to do with taxes and other specific, the capital budget in the case of capital, et cetera. But it's Ways and Means and Appropriations are the two major ones that the bills need to be heard. And in those hearings, the idea is to really speak to the fiscal impact and not focus on the policy anymore. The policy at this point is considered to be already heard and understood. After going through these committees, and along the way, the bill it cannot be heard, it can be amended, it can be voted down, or it can be passed through as is. And at that point, it goes onto a list and is waiting most of the time to have to go through a rules committee. There are some exceptions, but the rules committee is kind of the funnel which bills generally need to go through to get on the order of consideration to be heard within the chamber. This is called floor action, and there's a lot of procedural things that happen at that point. And again, all the same types of things can happen at that point. There's debate on the floor, the bill can be amended, it can be substituted, it can be voted down. Again, lots of hoops. If it does get voted off in whatever form, the floor, it gets signed by the Speaker of the House or the President of the Senate, and then we celebrate for about 3 minutes, and then it goes on to the opposite chamber, and it has to go through that same process in the opposite chamber. In the end, if there's in each chamber two different versions of a bill, that needs to be reconciled. You can't have conflicting language. So there's then a reconciliation process in that case. The biggest one is around the budget bill. Obviously, that's a little more complicated and sometimes a little more partisan. And they can set up a special committee to do that for the budget if needed. Once the bills, then we have the final bill, it's passed through this process, it goes on to the governor. The governor can sign it within a certain number of days. If he or she doesn't sign it within those days, it will automatically become law, or it can be vetoed or partially vetoed. So sometimes there's not, there's a lack of understanding that, yes, the budget bill can be passed, but with some line or partial veto. Also, if the bill is completely vetoed, it can be ridden by a 2/3 vote of the legislature, which is pretty rare. But and then finally, after it's signed, in a certain number of days, that bill becomes law. So that is a quick and dirty overview of the process. Okay, so when the bills are scheduled to be heard in policy committees, sorry, one moment, catch up. Once it's been dropped and it goes to that policy committee, it is then kind of really in the hands of the chair of that committee as far as when it will be heard and how much time will be spent on it. The committees that are most relevant generally for the WPN, those bills tend to be heard in the Human Services, in the House it's now called Human Services, Youth and Early Learning. They tend to sometimes move around kind of the names and the type of bills. And once again, they did that this year. In the Senate, still called Human Services. Also, housing can be an important committee. Obviously, higher ed and workforce, now also called post-secondary and workforce development, and K-12 education, and then sometimes law and justice committee. So those are the committees we tend to watch the bills coming through. And you can see here on the screen, Representative Tomiko Santos, the longstanding chair of the House K-12 Education Committee.
Yeah, thanks, Juliet. So we also wanted to include a slide here about the theory of systems change, because advocacy is deeply woven in the theory of systems change, and also so is the work that you all do, or even if you are people with lived experience or students, we each hold attitudes and beliefs, and that can start to create implicit and transformational change, and then bleed into other types of systems change, such as relational change through power dynamics and relationships and connections with people, and then also structural change through resource flows, practices, and policies. And the advocacy that we do really has a large part in the policy work and how practice is done, because obviously bills become law, and then that has to be kind of woven in, and there are certain rules around how we go about doing the work that we do. And I'll let Juliet kind of explain more about that as well.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because it really is not just a theory. When you look at kind of the course of policymaking, you can see this kind of how it all weaves together in Olympia. Obviously, one of the things that policymakers are doing are creating policies, but they don't do that, in a void. They come into this work with their own lived experience, their own attitudes and beliefs. They're meeting with their constituents and others who are bringing their attitudes and beliefs. And then relationships and connections are so important in Olympia. And it really isn't just kind of a textbook type of process. It's really a lot about having trusted messengers, building those relationships. And then, of course, it's no surprise that power dynamics are very much in play. Clearly, governor and his staff and legislators hold, by virtue of that role, certain power and hierarchy. But even amongst the folks working in the process as well, as far as lobbyists and advocates, there's certain power dynamics too, as far as there's, when you hear the word lobbyist, that can be a very well-funded corporate in-house lobbyist, or it can be someone from one of the organizations we work closely with, who are more of a volunteer base, maybe a Mockingbird youth. And so then the resource flows are another part that are clearly outcome of the decisions made in Olympia, and are of course hugely impactful. And then the practices which are brought to bear to help affect policy, and then policies affect practices. So it's all really interwoven, and I think it's just interesting to kind of think about how that really works in Olympia in real life.
Thanks, Juliet. That was great. So now, the more interactive part, starting to get there. What role do you play? So as people in the WPN, which if you're new to WPN, we consider people in the network who serve people that have experienced foster care or homelessness. And so it's pretty broad. And the Passport program is a like financial and support resource for people who have experienced foster care or homelessness. And so we have some providers that work in the K through 12 system, and then some that work in the college system, some that work at nonprofits, social workers, a lot of different members. We have about 800 people in our network right now, and they all support those students. So in terms of what role you play is because of the role that you have in your job or even just your personal experience, you can help legislators and others understand the realities of what you and your students are experiencing on the ground level. Oftentimes, legislators are the ones, obviously, that can vote to pass a bill or a program and things like that. But the implementation gets put on either like nonprofits or state agencies to actually see through. And so it's really, really important that we stay connected to legislators and let them know how things are going on the ground level, and just make sure that we're kind of mitigating unintended consequences and that it's actually serving the purpose of the intent of why the bill was created or the program. So you can help influence bills like in many different ways. If you are providing input about if bills would be helpful or detrimental from your perspective, how a bill would need to change in order to benefit the populations we serve and avoid unintentional consequences. A preview of kind of the methods of influence, which we'll get into a little bit later, are you can provide quotes that we can use in a letter or in testimony. And it can be from yourself, like as a case manager, whatever your role is, like, and what you notice is happening with a certain program or a bill, or like from a student. Written testimony, virtual testimony, in-person testimony in Olympia, legislative meetings, and budget staff meetings, agency staff meetings, coalition input, and on-call and action alerts. Did you want to add anything here, Juliet?
No, I'm good.
Okay.
So an area of confusion, understandably, is what the difference is between lobbying and advocacy, and what does that mean for those of you who are interested in bringing your experience to bear in the process. So lobbying activities include attempts basically to help pass or repeal legislation, as well as the outreach involved of gaining public support or opposition to legislation. So I think one of the key things to think about is it's an attempt to influence specific legislation through this direct or more indirect communication with policymakers and their staff. You're naming a bill, whether you have the number right or describing the bill, you're talking about a specific piece of legislation. And you're communicating in some form with decision makers about that and urging a vote one way or another. Advocacy, on the other hand, can be a range of activities that seek to bring about that systemic social change we were talking about. But you really are the word here, I think, is to think about educating, although you are educating with the goal of typically with the goal of influencing the listener, but you're keeping it more general and not about a specific bill. This can look like providing the impact of your program to help understand what would be the impact of a bill, and providing either qualitative and or quantitative data. And it's not just to elected officials, it could be advocating state agencies, the public, school districts, etc. And then as far as the important thing to remember about lobbying, the limitations on lobbying for organizations depends on the type of organization you work for. For example, we at CSF are 501c3, and there are restrictions in 501c3s on the amount of time and budget that can be spent on lobbying activities, and there is risk of losing your 501c3 status. And then state workers need to consult with their management or leadership as well. So it really is a matter of working with your, wherever you sit, working with your leadership on on what that role looks like for you. You know, for WASAC, it can be really different because they're a cabinet level agency under the governor versus OSPI, who is not, or, you know, it just, there's a lot of nuances. Happy to, again, take questions offline on that, but it really comes down to working with your leadership. And I would also recommend, if you are interested, asking what the limitations are of you testifying or getting involved as an individual without the affiliation of your organization. That can often be another option.
Great. So I wanted also to include a slide about like certain topics relating to the WPN and also bills of interest that are actually being heard next week. And if you sign up for the action alerts, which we'll include a link later on, this is the kind of information that you'll be getting either via text or email. You'll be able to opt in to topic specific action alerts, and also if you want to receive them via text or via email. But because of the population WPN serves, which I've already stated a little bit, we care deeply about bills that will impact those who have or currently are experiencing foster care or homelessness, and also bills that will impact the K through 12 and higher education systems. And this, of course, includes apprenticeship. I think I forgot to mention earlier that part of Passport, it is connected to like higher education training, because the goal is to help give people the opportunity to persist in higher education. So we have 2 tracks. One is college and one is apprenticeship. So that gives you a little bit of background. And there are some of these are some of the issues too that CSF advocacy team tracks. So Juliet and I are tracking a lot of these bills and seeing each week like what's relevant to the WPN as well as our CSF priorities. So the bills being heard next week. I'm just going to go over the topics, and then we'll drop a link in the chat about where you can find like specific information about the bill and read through it. But there's House Bill 1140, which is on the operating budget. And then also House Bill 1141 is also on the operating budget, but with a focus on the supplemental budget. That's also on the 11th. House Bill 1045 is the Basic Income Pilot Program. And that's going to be heard on January 11th at 1:30. And that one was introduced last year as well by Rep. Berry. And there's a lot of cool work going into that. So definitely recommend checking that out. House Bill 1013 is about regional apprenticeship programs, and that's also being heard on the 11th. We've got Senate Bill 5019, which is about school safety staff. There's Senate Bill 5174 about student transportation. There's Senate Bill 5120 about a 23-hour crisis relief center. Senate Bill 5048, which is about college and high school fees. And then lastly, Senate Bill 5079, which is about tuition establishment dates. And it is possible, sometimes agendas change up until right before meetings, the committee meetings. So it is possible that bills will get added or taken away. So it's important to kind of stay updated if you're interested in that, or sign up for the alerts so that we can continue to keep you updated. And now we're actually going to have an opportunity to kind of go through that process, but I'll let Juliet kind of kick it off.
Sure. Yeah. So we just want to dive into how does that look for you to bring your voice and your experience to the legislative process? A constituent, as you may know, is someone who lives in the legislative district or the congressional district of a policymaker. And in my past life, I used to work for the lieutenant governor, who's also president of the Senate. And a quote that he had, which stuck with me, which I believe is true, is a constituent is worth 100 lobbyists. Lobbyists are paid to do a job, and they can absolutely 100% believe in it, like the work I do. I am a lobbyist that works for CSF. But it's still not the same as bringing someone from, especially if they're from the same district as the policymaker they're talking to, and therefore they're the ones voting that person in or out, which obviously kind of gets the attention of the legislator a bit more. But but that aside, legislators truly want to hear from the people who are going to be impacted by that legislation, and they want to hear from the lived expertise of those who have been impacted. Um, so we want to make sure that we're working with you to kind of see like, well, how can I do that? How can I bring my voice? How can I bring in the cases of those of you who work with students so that we can actually come up with better legislation in the end.
Awesome. So on that note, if you are interested in any of the bills or want to look more into it and then later want to either weigh in support or testify or anything like that, we wanted to just provide space to walk through that with you. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of go through that process. We're going to use the budget bill as an example of how to do this. And one of the reasons why is because there is a lot in the governor's budget. And so when you take a look at it, which we'll also drop a link to where you can find like all the details of the governor's budget, but there should be something that in there that you probably care about, whether it's funding for a program in your agency or something that you care about like climate change or whatever. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this link. This is where you want to go to sign in for any bill, and then you can find the bill number after that. For the governor's budget, that's going to be heard in the House Appropriations Committee. So the chamber is the House. So I'm going to select that. And then the committee is Appropriations. And then it's being heard on the 11th at 4 p.m. And then I'm just going to go ahead and select the first one. So there's 4 options for the type of testimony. The first one is to sign up for testimony in person during the hearing. So that's going to be in Olympia on the Capitol campus. The second one is if you'd like to testify remotely. So as you can guess, this year the session is happening hybrid, which is wonderful. Last year was just remotely mainly, and so it's really nice to be able to have the opportunity to weigh in online and have it kind of like brings up some accessibility, like I guess remedies. So that's been helpful. But you can also go in person. The third option is you can have your position noted for the legislative record. And this one is really simple. This one, I think there's 3 or 4 options, and it's you just state if you support the bill, if you don't, other, and then we'll go into this a little bit more too. I'll select this one, but that one is the quickest option. It only takes about 1 minute. The other ones, testimony can be typically anywhere from 1 minute to 3 minutes. So it is brief, but it does take time and intentionality to construct it in a like meaningful and effective way. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit too. But the fourth option is submitting written testimony. This is actually a great bill to submit written testimony for, because there are since there's so many things in the governor's budget, there are a lot of people that typically want to speak on it. And so testimony is very, very limited and typically on the shorter end. And so if you want your voice heard and to be able to say more, I would recommend in this case submitting written testimony. In other bills that are very like specific, it might be a better option to do like testimony, like verbal testimony, but for this one specifically, I'd recommend written. Another option on this page, which is really helpful, is that you can see who signed in for this agenda item. So you can see like different organizations or individuals that have either supported these bill like items or are against it or other. And you can see there's been about 35 people so far that have weighed in on this one. One thing that's important to note is that sometimes when you provide verbal testimony or written, it might not always ask you if you're pro or con. And even though it'll be in like your speech or your testimony, it is also important to weigh in if that's important to you. Excuse me. Okay, so just for time's sake, I'll select I would like my position noted for the legislative record. Excuse me. And then you'll see it's a really quick form. It only asks a handful of questions and they're really easy to complete. It's just your position, if you're against or for the bill or other, your name, your email, organization, if you're testifying like as an official representative on behalf of the organization. I'm gonna grab some water, one moment.
Yeah, I can pick this up. One thing I would say is that this although as Emily pointed out, this is a very quick process. It also is limited because you can't elaborate on why you are choosing pro, con, or other. And other, well, all of them raises questions, but other particularly raises questions of like, because that expresses that you have a concern, but you're not able to elaborate what that concern is. So if you have time, my recommendation is do a short written testimony because it does give you space to actually say why, give the reasons why. Go ahead, Emily.
Yeah, thanks so much for that, Juliet. Yeah, great point. Another like really important point is that you have to also be really thoughtful and careful about opposing bills because it is a political climate. And so there are different legislators that are really passionate and just lobbyists or advocates, organizations that are really passionate about certain bills. So you have also to think about the impact of what it would mean to oppose a bill versus especially for the governor's budget, for example, if you support certain things but don't support other things, it might be a strategic move, for example, to weigh in support, but in the written testimony, if there's something that you don't agree with, to specifically like call that out. So that's always an option. And I believe in the written testimony, we can go back and check in a minute, but to see if you can like state your position as well. So yeah, this form, once you're done with this, you just submit registration and then that's it. Your position will be noted for the record. So I'm just going to go back here. There was something I was just going to do. I'm trying to remember what that was. It had to do with this.
Is it the written testimony?
Yes. Yes. Exactly. Yes. So, okay, for the written testimony, you do state your position. So it must have been for the verbal one. I don't think you do. You just sign up and like enter the basic information. So if you're testifying verbally, it's also important to weigh in. But for this one, it looks like this is an option here to get it noted.
I do think actually for verbal, when you sign in, it does ask you.
Oh, okay. Well, it never hurts. It never hurts to do both. Yeah.
I'll just add, just make sure if you are doing in-person verbal testimony, all of this is for the record. So just state your name, organization, and your position. Test like Juliet Schindler with College Success Foundation, testifying pro on Senate Bill 1040 or whatever it is. And then that's kind of the best practice for capturing that for the record.
Awesome. Great. Any questions about that process? It's very, very simple. Really should only take a minute or two. Yeah.
Sean. How do I like actually read the bill? Like how do I read what the budget, the governor's budget is, and how much money it is and what it's being spent on?
Great question. So let me go here. Ledge.. So those are two different websites for bill information specifically, and we did drop this in the chat, so feel free to grab that link. But if you go to the Washington State Legislature homepage, which I'm on now, and just go to bill information, you can type in the specific bill number of the one that you want the information for, and you can read the whole language and also like a summary, just a little blurb about the bill if you're like looking for something quick. So like for the governor's budget, that one, let's see, was 1140. So I would type in 1140 here. And then you can see the original bill here. This is large, like it is rare for a bill to be 390 pages and you don't have to read through all of that. Like it looks like
that thing was made by a freaking ancient printer.
Yeah, it does. It really does. But yeah, in terms of like specific like information about the governor's budget, Juliet dropped a link. It is, like I said, this one is like a very, very multifaceted one. Other bills won't look like this. They're a lot more simple and about like one topic, but this one is about a lot of topics and agency requests and things like that.
I would just add, yeah, so when you have a bill like the budget bill, what I do is use find, use keywords and do a search. Because you probably don't want to read word for word unless you have a lot of time on your hands. And if you know kind of, as you can see, they're put under different agencies. So you can also kind of look at, under the relevant agency. For those of you who are interested in kind of looking more at different bills and reading them, things to keep an eye out is whether it's a new section. So that would be, this is a new fresh start, right? This is a new budget bill, but many bills, I should say, are changing existing language. So you'll see sentences and words that are struck out, and then some that are added. So you really want to look for that, like what is being changed on an existing bill that's being modified. And I think that could just be confusing at first before you're used to it.
Yeah, another thing that I would suggest too is that oftentimes there's an agency championing a bill, and so you can go to that agency and see who's like organizing testimony for that bill. It's a really good way to collaborate with partners, and they will give you like the information that you need and no more, no less, and that is really helpful. At least that's been my experience. So yeah, and then you can, one option too is when you do sign up for testimony, you can sign up as a part of a panel. That is something you want to do if you do organize with other people, like community partners and things like that in an organized way. You can also do it separately, but something to talk with the people you're collaborating about. Okay, so now we wanted to give time and space for everyone to practice drafting testimony, because as I explained before, it usually is between like 1 to 3 minutes. And so we have to think really intentionally about the best use of our time within that. So I always plan my testimony ahead of time, because I think about who I know is providing testimony and what value do I bring, like as an individual with my work hat, but also a little bit with my personal hat on. So we actually got this handy guide of drafting your message to legislators from the Youth Development Executives of King County. So we thought we would borrow it, and we'll drop that in the chat too if we haven't already. But there's 5 easy steps that we'll go through now, and then we'll take a minute after this to go into breakout rooms and we'll have everyone introduce themselves, and then to take some time to kind of do this on your own or with the group, and then like practice saying them out loud. But the first step is to introduce yourself. So obviously that's your name, where you're from. If you know what legislative district you live in, that's always great to say. Especially if you know if one of the committee staff or legislators represents that district. And to just share like how you come into this space. So if you're coming to this space as like on behalf of an organization or as a citizen, like independent from an organization, if you just care about the issue, that's important to say. The second step is to state your issue. So for example, saying something like, I'm here to talk to you about blank. And obviously these are really simplified. It's not just going to be 1 sentence per each line, since it's 1 to 3 minutes. You could make it brief, but in order to make it more impactful, it'd be a few sentences maybe for each point. The third one is sharing why you care. So you could start off by saying, this is important to me because, and then fill in the blank. And if you feel comfortable and safe doing so, it's also a great time to share if you have any personal connection or lived experience that you have in relation to that bill or budget item. Fourth is conveying to the legislator why they should care. So they're going to care if it's an important issue in our state, and they'd probably like to hear like merit around why it's an important issue and especially in their community, like in their district. And then lastly, you want to make a very clear ask. So that might look like asking them to vote in support of that budget or bill item, or, to collaborate with you, different things like that. But typically it is around voting, or making sure it gets, in the budget or things like that. So we did have that linked. I'll just open it up so everyone can see this. And then I will divide us into breakout rooms of about 4 people, and we'll do this for about 12 minutes. And yeah, if you could pull up these once you get to the breakout rooms. So maybe click that link now so that you have it when you get to the breakout rooms. That'd be great. And everyone can kind of talk through this together, take some time to kind of plan what you might say and what you're passionate about. And then we'll ask volunteers to, if anyone is brave enough to share. And one thing I'll say is that for this purpose, like, one, we expect it to be very bare bones. Like, it's not much time that we're giving to this. We don't have much time right now, so no pressure. And then another thing is you can talk about anything that's important to you. So it doesn't have to be WPN or passport specific. It can be something that just you care about as a citizen or as a person. So with that, I will break us into breakout rooms.
And I'm just going to let you all know I'm going to pause recording while we do this and while we briefly talk about it when we get back, just so you don't have to worry about feeling self-conscious.
Awesome. So I know we're just about at time here, but if you can just stick around for one more minute, we just want to make sure you get all the information before you leave today. So we just wanted to summarize the ways you can get involved. These, the 2 things in yellow are linked. So Donna, if you wouldn't mind dropping those in the chat, or Juliet, that'd be great. But again, you can always reach out to us to set up a get to know you meeting. WPN also has regional group meetings, so you can reach out to myself or Donna or Juliet to get more information about that. You can, again, provide us with quotes, join us in meetings with legislators, weigh in on bills, which we went through today, provide spoken testimony virtually or in Olympia, provide written testimony. You can attend advocacy days on the Capitol campus. Mockingbirds is, I happen to know that at the top of my head, it's February 3rd. So you can find more information on their website. And then lastly, of course, you can sign up to receive those topic-specific action alerts via either text or email. And with that, we wanted to just share our contact info again and open it up to any questions. But for those of you who have to leave, thanks so much for joining us. If you can stick around, we'll stick around for a few minutes to answer questions.
And I'll just add briefly, advocacy days are an opportunity to come and show kind of a group presence and to support legislation on particular issues. So the Mockingbird Day, for example, is those who are involved directly with Mockingbird Society and others who support the issues they bring forward, the issues that the young people had decided on earlier in the year. They have a process. They tend to wear, kind of a bright orange scarf, because part of it is kind of that visual impact now that we have ability to be in person again, so that, literally you can hear people saying, including legislators, like, oh, what's this? And so it just brings visibility and more impactful voice to have that kind of focus on that one day. And then they tend to set up meetings with legislators on that day as well. So let us know if you're interested in learning more about that.
Yeah, I'm right now, I'm currently working with Mockingbird. I'm in their program and stuff like that. So I was wondering if any of you have my email, so I could get alerts on via text message and stuff like that.
Yeah, you can sign up for the topic-specific action alerts using the link that Donna just dropped again. So do you have access to the chat, Sean?
Yep. Here we go.
Perfect. Yeah. So that way you can identify what you'd like to hear with, so that we don't spam you with things you're not interested in. Yeah.
All right. Perfect.
Great. Any other questions?
Well, thank you all for attending. Don't hesitate to follow up with either or both of us. We're just kicking off next week. It'll be, 105 days. So it's gonna be a lot going on, and we really do value your input. You have the knowledge that's needed to make good legislation. So so please don't be intimidated. It is kind of fun, I think, but yeah, we'd love to partner with you on this. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Yeah, and let us know too if your students want to get involved too. We're happy to coordinate with them directly or with you as well. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great day.
You too.